The more that I deep dive into the Mets roster and their needs this offseason, the more I come back to a prevailing thought. Should the Mets just run it back? That's what we'll discuss on this edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, as I have been looking at the Mets free agency, we've discussed all the big names over the past week and change since the season ended. Jacob deGrom, Edwin, Diaz, Brandon Nimmo. We've already started to go through some other options. We did that on yesterday's show, looking at moving Jeff McNeil to right field, moving Starling Marte to center, and then that would potentially open up the door to sign Dansby Swanson, Carlos Correa, Xander Bogaerts, one of those guys, Trey Turner. The more I looked at those moves and compared them to Brandon Nimmo, the more I continued to come back to the point that maybe Brandon Nimmo is still the best option. When I think about Jacob deGrom pitching in any uniform other than a Mets jersey, I get sick to my stomach. I don't want to see it. Edwin Diaz, it seems like an inevitability that he'll be back with the Mets next year. As we already discussed the reports that came out that the Mets could lock him up before he even hits free agency in that period where they can negotiate with him, without any other teams talking to Diaz. So when we go through what it means to run it back, I think that is where my head really is with this. It's looking at the most important free agents and saying, could the Mets really do better? If Seth Lugo is viewing himself as a relief pitcher on the market right now, not trying to find somewhere we can start, which we never know. Seth might want that opportunity still. And as much as you can say, look at his career numbers, like I certainly have on this show many a times over the 4 years we've been doing this, and have really broken down that he has a far better reliever than a starter, he might still want that, and there might still be a team that looks at Seth Lugo and says, yeah, well, we'll put you on our rotation. So there's decisions like that to be made, but all of the good free agents the Mets have are worthy of paying. And it particularly starts with the top three. And, I just don't know what's better when it comes to the fallback plans. And we'll go case by case. With Nimmo, unless you get Aaron Judge, you're taking a step back in free agency from any other player not named Brandon Nimmo to put into your outfield. It's just that simple. Now, could you, within an aggregate of moves, make up for the loss of Nimmo if you make a trade or you sign multiple guys and you pack something together? Yeah, it's a possibility, but most likely you're going to be taking a step back in the outfield if you don't re-sign Brandon Nimmo. If you don't sign Edwin Diaz in the bullpen, how are you going to replace him? Because the rest of the closers that are available, it's the old guys. It's Aroldis Chapman, it's Craig Kimbrell, it's Kenley Jansen. Those aren't guys that I'm really comfortable saying, hey, he's got the ninth inning for the Mets. So with Diaz, I don't see an alternative. With Jacob deGrom, you can say you love Carlos Rodon, but does that make the Mets better in the playoffs than they were this past year? You could say health, but deGrom was healthy to take the ball to the playoffs and won the lone playoff game the Mets actually took. You look at some of the other free agents, and that's where I think running it back gets a little bit dicey. You talk about a Chris Bassett. You talk about a Taijuan Walker. Are these guys that are going to come back? I think for Bassett, we've discussed the fact that, look, he's got that option, 19 mil, likely turns it down to hit free agency. That's the way he was speaking. Like he was going to be a free agent. You tag him with the QO because why not? So get in the whatever, I think it's 19.45 or something like that. Like it's close to 19.5 million for the qualifying offer this year. You extend it to him because if he just turned down basically that same money on a 1-year deal, likely turns it down again so he can be a free agent. You get a comp pick attached to him. That'll only lessen his market to potentially bridge the gap to a reunion at a cost that you think is feasible, but more than likely, if you were to bring back deGrom, it would make sense to move on from Bassett. Or is there a school of thinking that a Rodon-Bassett combination is better than deGrom alone? I think those are the types of discussions that have to be broached here. But ultimately, when I say run it back, I'm referring to the big ticket guys. And with that, there's not a lot else you're going to be doing when it comes to spending. I think that's the bigger point here. You can bring back Carlos Carrasco at essentially $11 million, so $14 million option, $3 million buyout, so a net of about $11 million. You could re-sign deGrom, you could re-sign Diaz, you can re-sign Nimmo. At that point, I think you're pretty locked in, but that's okay. I look at this team, if you make all of those moves, and I'm not even addressing the bullpen beyond Diaz, because whether that means Adam Ottavino, Seth Lugo, Joely Rodriguez, Michael Givens, all these potential free agents, I mean, you cobble together a bullpen however you can, but you need that backbone. You need Edwin Diaz. So let's just say they do those three moves and run it back that way. How do you take this team to the next level, or do you have to? Because at the end of the day, it's a 101-win ball club. Now, you take Chris Bassett out of that mix, and you get worse, but it's how do you mix and match the pieces? To me, running it back means your top three free agents return. And the more I look at this market, I just don't think the Mets can really do any better than re-signing Edwin Diaz, Jacob deGrom, and Brandon Nimmo. But we'll see what they do. Next, what I want to discuss is if they bring those three guys back, where are the other internal roster solutions that can plug the rest of the holes? And then what else is needed to be approved upon to really complete what you would hope could be a championship roster next season? But the other thing is, I don't know about you personally, I hate to wear dress shirts. I mean, they're often uncomfortable, and whether it's the material that doesn't feel good on your skin or the size just isn't right. Look, the dress shirt was due for a radical reinvention, and luckily that is where Rhone stepped in. They came through with the Rhone commuter shirt, which is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible shirt known to man. I love my Rhone commuter shirt, whether I am playing, around at golf, whether I'm taking it out to a nice dinner. Rhone's comfortable four-way stretch fabric provides breathability and flexibility that leaves you free to enjoy what life throws your way, from your commute to work to your 18 holes on the golf course. It's time to feel confident with a wrinkle-free shirt without the hassle, because with Rhone's wrinkle release technology, your wrinkles will disappear as you stretch and wear the shirt. It's that easy. It also comes with the Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, so you'll be smelling fresh and clean all day long. And on top of that, Rhone is 100% machine washable, so you can ditch the dry cleaner altogether. The commuter shirt can get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. Head to Rhone.com/lockedon and use the promo code LOCKEDON to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to Rhone, that's RHONE.com/lockedon, and use the code LOCKEDON to get that 20% off again from your entire order. It's time to find your corner office comfort with Rhone. Now, if the New York Mets bring back Jacob deGrom, Edwin Diaz, and Brandon Nimmo, the question is, how do they improve as a team? Because you still could lose a Chris Bassett, lose a Taijuan Walker, lose any of the other members of the bullpen. So what is left that you can bank on being better next season before you look at the moves you'd have to make within the margins? Because, I mean, I don't even know what the dollar amount is next season for those three guys, but you're broaching $100 million on your payroll with those three guys alone, because Edwin Diaz might not get 20 a year, but he could get damn near close. deGrom, you'd imagine, gets over 40, probably. Depends on the structure of the contract, but on the almost low end, you'd say 40. If Scherzer gets 43.3, granted a little more health there, but still, deGrom's probably going to get somewhere close to 40, so that's 60. Maybe not quite 100 million because Nimmo's not getting 40 himself, but he might get 25. So all of a sudden, you're talking about $85 million in those free agents. You're going to blow through the luxury tax, which is fine. And it seems like Steve Cohen is prepared to do that. But once you make those moves in free agency, there's no additional big bat you're adding. There's no additional closer type reliever you're going to bring in. Maybe you can bring back Adam Ottavino and Seth Lugo, maybe. But it's not like you're getting Chapman or Jansen. Not that you necessarily want those guys, to be honest. They're kind of over the hill in my opinion. But regardless, it just leaves you with basically the same team you had this year, minus some guys that I think would price out, like a Bassett, like a Taijuan Walker. Carrasco's affordable, but you look at the rotation, and I think we've already spent plenty of time on it. If you have Scherzer, deGrom, Peterson, McGill, Lucchesi, Budo even, you got 6 guys. You got 2 guys you love. I think Peterson is a pretty solid number 4. You need to find that 3, and you have to trust that McGill, Lucchesi, Budo can kind of factor in and make up for that 5. But I think that's a trade. So basically then you're saying you got to make one big trade. Internally, the way that the rotation takes that big jump would be for Tyler McGill to be that guy, to be the guy he was in April. And if you get him to pitch like that, well, then there's less pressure on, somebody else to step up to be able to start a playoff game. I mean, would I be completely floored or stunned in any way if this time next year you're going into a playoff series and it's deGrom, Scherzer, Peterson, and McGill? I could see it because I do believe in those 2 pitchers. But it's about finding depth. And because there's just not a ton of upper-level depth when it comes to the starters in the Mets system, most of the best guys, and on tomorrow's show, Friday Farm Report, not exactly sure what I'm going to be covering yet with that, but we will be diving into the farm system. A lot of the arms are low A, high A. I mean, that's where most of them are living right now, which is fine. But I don't think that you're going to see a starter burst through. And again, maybe that's something we'll explore a bit on the show for our Friday Farm Report. But, the rotation, I think, unless Budo takes a massive leap, that's where there's not a ton of internal solutions. The bullpen, I mean, we saw, Bryce Montes de Aca. There's a couple guys, Drew Smith still being good. That's always something you cobble together. You look at the starting lineup. If you're to bring Brandon Nimmo back, what do you really have to do? Honestly, that's the crazy thing to me is I think you re-sign Brandon Nimmo, and as much as people want to say, oh, you got to add more to this offense, I think you're kind of set. I think you're banking on your kids. That's what I think. I think you're banking on the prospects because you still have the same starting lineup. Mark Canha, Nimmo, Marte. I don't see any problems there. Infield, you got Escobar, Lindor, McNeil, Alonso with Beatty pushing Escobar at third, with Guillorme as a great backup infielder. Catcher, you got Tomas Nido and James McCann. But really, you got Francisco Alvarez, who you would imagine has a really good chance to be the starting catcher next season. At DH, you have a full year of Daniel Vogelbach, and say what you want about Vogelbach, he actually put up some really solid numbers in the Mets uniform. He was a little bit streaky, but I think as far as the left-handed half of your DH platoon, you're fine with Vogie. And you got Vientos. So I understand the trepidation to bring back the same team offensively. But it was a top 5 offense for most of the season. I know they got cold down the stretch, but I believe enough in the 3 prospects to raise the ceiling of this team further, that if you can look at the exact same team you have, but instead you have Escobar coming off the bench, you have Nido and McCann, whoever is still around, off the bench because Alvarez is your starter for every game of the playoffs when you get there. I mean, those 2 guys, Beatty and Alvarez, I'm staking a lot to heading into next season. And I think if we see the Mets only bring back Brandon Nimmo, you're going to be freaking out as fans. But I'll tell you, that would show me that they're confident in those 2. And then Vientos, I do believe, can be that complement to Vogelbach next year. I think that he was dealt a pretty bad hand to not get called up until September, and then to be asked to essentially be the savior for a position that just hadn't been able to fill all season. You give him a full spring training, let him try to break camp with the team. You can always even honestly, Ruff is cheap. I know everyone hates that, but he has a cheap contract. You can very easily bring back Darren Ruff with Mark Vientos, have them battle it out in camp, and if Vientos wins the job, you can find a home for Darren Ruff somewhere. You could trade Darren Ruff at the dollar amount he's at, and a team would take him. I mean, it's I don't remember exactly. I think it's like $3 million. It's nothing crazy. I mean, you can find the Cincinnati Reds and be like, look, here's a guy you can slot into your lineup that's going to hit for you. That you might be able to trade at the deadline. Take him. Just take them. You can even eat a little bit of money if they're that cheap. But look, it's a. I wonder what they do there, because you would say non-tender him. I think he's so cheap that you never know. And look, you have the same type of a conversation to be had with Dominic Smith. I wonder what those guys end up doing. Do they move any of them? Do they keep them? How's that all going to work out? But that's where this team is if they run it back. And then the question is, how else can you improve? And that's what we'll discuss next after a quick word from our sponsors. So if the Mets were to run it back and they get some of those internal improvements with Alvarez and Beatty and Vientos, what do they have to address this offseason otherwise? Fourth outfielder? Maybe. They got this guy, Jake Mangum, that I like a lot. Now, can you go out and sign the comp of a Travis Jankowski to a minor league deal to compete with him? Absolutely. But he's an older prospect. I believe he's 26. A guy that played all 4 years in college, had an incredible storied career has just put together a great season. If it wasn't for an injury, I think we would have seen him this year. A guy that can play all three positions of the outfield well, has hit everywhere he's been. I don't think he has the highest ceiling to be a starter, but you really never know. So I like Jake Mangum a ton. I think he makes a lot of sense to be that fourth outfielder. So again, when we're looking at the position players, if you just bring back Nimmo, you're in good shape. Now the question is, how do you get that extra home run pop? And that is where a full year of Vogelback, Mark Vientos, Francisco Alvarez, and Brett Beatty would have to carry you. But I just don't think that the other options that are out there, again, short of the pie in the sky Aaron Judge signing, which why would the Yankees let him walk? Like, we'll entertain that at some point this offseason, but I just don't see it. I think we entertain it if the 5 days after the World Series happened, if the Yankees didn't win the World Series and Judge didn't get a contract on the spot. Then we can, if he actually becomes a free agent, then we'll maybe discuss it. So offensively, I think you just have to bank on the prospects. Because, again, if you bring Nimmo back, you're sort of set. Now, how do you get better? Building out a bullpen. That's important. And I think the Mets, by the end of the season, surprisingly, actually liked their pen. Like, I wasn't really as concerned about it going into the playoffs because I felt like Seth Lugo was throwing the ball well. Adam Ottavino was. Drew Smith actually came on strong down the stretch. So did Joely Rodriguez. So it looked good down at the end of the year. But now, a lot of these guys are free agents. So building a bullpen would be key. And if you have Diaz back, that's a huge part of it. The rotation, you have to replace potentially 4 guys, but again, we're assuming deGrom in this exercise. We would assume also that Carrasco will come back because he'd be affordable. So it'd be replacing Taijuan Walker and Chris Bassett. I think having a full healthy season of a Tyler McGill and having David Peterson entrenched in the rotation, I think that you're okay not replacing Taijuan Walker. Now, there's also the Trevor Williams of it all. So could you find another swingman? And I think that's just a challenge for Billy Epler and company to find that guy that's undervalued, that's on the market, who maybe wants to play for a winner, who's a veteran that can play that swingman role to replace a Williams/Walker, right? And then from there, it's just making that one trade to get the other starter. That's really where I'm at here. I think if you run it back with Diaz, deGrom, and Nimmo, all you really have to do is build out a bullpen, add some pitching depth that goes along with it, trade for a number 3 starter. You do those things, And this team, in my opinion, will be ready to roll. And I like the cohesion going into next year rather than completely tearing it down. It's going to be expensive to run it back with those 3 free agents, but I think all of them are worthy of bringing back next season. So we'll see what the Mets do here. On tomorrow's show, a Friday farm report, and that'll close out our week. We'll continue going through this offseason. At some point, we'll do a little bit of reflection on the year that was and just keep running through scenarios that we could see play out in this exciting hot stove season that we're getting close to. A couple of weeks away, and we can put this season behind us and look forward more. So looking forward to that. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter @Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB, hosted by Paul Francis Sullivan. Locked On MLB is where you want to go to stay up to date with everything going on in Major League Baseball. You can follow Locked On MLB wherever you get podcasts.